Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Well, I've never been this happy. How about yourself?
I'm tippy tappy, Bill. Tippy tappy.
Nice.
Today we are talking about being a people pleaser, especially as a mentor, and how that can really get in the way of developing people. Um, all of us have saboteurs that we may or may not be aware of, and those can have both strengths and drawbacks. For example, a person who's a hyperachiever, that is a person who's getting their stuff done, right? They're the ones that we as leaders like to give tasking or projects because we know it will happen on time and meet milestones, right? Unfortunately, that can also have a drawback because sometimes those hyperachievers can also leave dead bodies in the wake on their way of getting things done, right?
Well, we don't know anybody like that, do we?
Nope, never dealt with those. And
Right.
so we all have these strengths that have shadow sides, and sometimes we're aware and sometimes we're not. But for a mentor whose role is primarily in developing people, one such saboteur is when you don't want to give critical feedback so as to avoid hurting someone's feelings. And when you're a people pleaser and wanting everyone to be happy. So the strengths of being a people pleaser is that you have a high level of empathy, right? And that you have a high level of emotional intelligence. You can sense other people's emotions. You have strong connections with people. But as a mentor, when that is one of your stronger behaviors that you exhibit, that can also have a drawback where the mentee can develop a mistrust of you as the mentor because you're holding back critical feedback for them. Bill, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, so I don't think anybody as a good mentor is trying to hurt anybody, right? So delivery always counts. How you say things is somewhat important, but how it's heard by your mentee or your audience is always the most important part. Speaking of saboteurs, I was told earlier in my career that one of my saboteurs is I have a passionate way of delivering things. And
No.
yeah, I know. I know it comes as a great shock to you. In fact, in my Myers-Briggs evaluation, it's you're often surprised that people think you're mad at them. And so the point is, I didn't realize how I was delivering the message. And so delivery always counts. And
Hmm.
even though I don't know that I qualify as a people pleaser, I certainly resonate with the thought of being very sensitive these days to make sure that when I'm delivering a message, I'm not doing it in some hurtful way.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, if you're a mentor and you know this is your tendency, keep listening. We have some actionable steps for you to overcome this saboteur. But, Bill, how would a mentee know if their mentor might be a people pleaser?
Sure. So, so if you're meeting with your mentor and they never provide any feedback that highlights like areas for growth or improvement, that certainly is an indicator. And if you're talking to mentors about opportunities and you're taking their advice and you're still not getting anywhere with like roles and promotions, opportunities, and you clearly have some areas to grow. And if your mentor's not providing that insight, they may be a people pleaser.
Yeah, also, if you only get donuts or cupcakes when you visit your mentor and you never take a bite from a lemon, you might have a people pleasing mentor. Not that I know anybody who's like that.
Yeah. So what do you do about this stuff? Well, keep listening. We're about to go through how mentors can learn to provide some excellent feedback. And if your mentor isn't doing that for you, then ask for it and keep asking. How can I improve? What do you see as behaviors or skills that I'm lacking that are going to stop me from growing in the company, in the organization, in this industry?
Yeah. What's the best way for a mentor to provide feedback if they know themselves to be a people pleaser, Bill?
That's a great question. People pleasing mentors, clearly they care deeply about their mentees, which of course is a strength, but it can make feedback feel uncomfortable or inconsistent. And the goal here is not to stop caring. It's to give feedback in a way that's clear, kind, and sustainable. One might say compassionate. So here's a practical approach that works especially well for people pleasers. First off, I'd start by reframing the feedback as support, not conflict. The mentor specifically there is helping the person to grow. Typically, the mentors are not in the mentee's supervisory chain, so they're not providing performance evaluations and that kind of feedback. And the people pleasers are avoiding feedback because they associate with hurt feelings. So try reframing that thought about it and say, "Yeah, you're helping somebody to succeed, and you're going to help them reduce future frustration. You're going to develop the next set of leaders for your organization." And so maybe a helpful mental shift is avoiding feedback feels kind in the moment, but it's really unkind in the long term.
Yeah, Bill, I feel like timing here is as important as delivery, which we'll get into delivery shortly. But I can think of more than once when I had some feedback to give a person who I just witnessed give a painful briefing or have an ineffective conversation with somebody or even make a remark in a meeting that deflated the team. In front of people is not the time to give this feedback. During your mentoring conversations, or if you don't have one planned, take a quick walk around the hallway or outside to provide privacy for the conversation. Do you have any stories to share, Bill?
Well, sure. And I'll tell you that I'll give you two stories. One is specifically to what you're talking about, being in a meeting with somebody in this particular meeting who made a very inappropriate comment in front of a large crowd. And I was the person leading the meeting and sort of had to say, well, we're not going to talk about it that way for right now. And I'll get back to you later. And then try to move on with the meeting as opposed to laying into them because they had made some very inappropriate commentary, and it just that was not the place to do it. I think both of us, from our military backgrounds, have certainly heard the expression "praise in public, punish in private," and so this person was going to get to hear why that was not okay, but that wasn't in front of a bunch of other people was not the right time. I also have a reverse mentoring offering for you on this topic, where somebody was briefing me as the leader in the room, and they were trying to convince me to go down a certain path, follow a certain new line of work. And I was clear that we were not going to do that. And I said so in not so many words that, we're just not going to follow that path. And by the way, I had known this person a very, very long time. I'd worked with him closely for years. And so I just delivered in my usual, what I thought of was my very direct, but not, not particularly harmful way. Uh, Meanwhile, after the meeting, I got some feedback that said, "Holy mackerel! Why on earth were you so mad at that person? I've never seen you rip into somebody like that." And I was caught completely off guard. And so back to the point of what gets heard is what's important, not what I thought I said. And at the very next meeting of the team, the very first thing I did was to apologize and try to rebuild the trust with that team because I was trying to be clear that I didn't want to follow that path in some business opportunity, but I certainly was not trying to be hurtful. And so it's clear that what gets heard is the most important part, and you need to be checking on that. So I got some reverse mentoring from the team about you may have thought you were delivering that with compassion, Bill, but what we heard was a beating, a verbal beating for that guy. And so, very, very critical for the way that you deliver the message. And for the people pleasers, they might never have gone to where I went, but it's just as important for people pleasers and folks who don't think of themselves that way to be very cognizant of the way they're delivering messages in a clear and kind way.
Well, it's also telling that you had a good enough relationship with the colleagues that did bring this to your attention afterwards, that they felt comfortable in doing so and giving you essentially that reverse mentoring on how you showed up in a meeting?
Well, they gave me some terrific feedback, which I took very much to heart. And as I said, and went back to the team at the very next meeting and said, I really apologize for delivering it that way. I'll be more cognizant of the way that I'm delivering the message. So the feedback can go both ways and is just as beneficial to mentors and mentees.
Yeah. I'm curious, and we won't know if that person felt uncomfortable in giving that feedback, but it goes into our second point on discomfort is not the same as being harmed, right? Discomfort is a temporary feeling. And so sometimes giving feedback where you feel like you might be critical may make you, especially if you're a people pleaser, uncomfortable. And it's important to realize is that actually not giving feedback causes long-term damage to trust, to performance, and to respect. Like I'm thinking about if that person hadn't given you that feedback, then how did the team that did not know you as well, the rest of the team that did not know you as well, how might they have showed up to future meetings if you hadn't come back and actually repaired and done some repair work with the team to say, my intent was not to berate. My intent was to, make sure that we're all on the same page and that I be clear about we're not going down this particular road of getting that business, but, not with any intent, not with any malice associated with it.
Absolutely. I mean, the the importance of that trust to be, in that case, to be rebuilt so that forever people are able to give feedback both directions and be able to have the safety in the relationship that says I can give feedback and somebody's not going to lop my head off because I was being honest with them.
Mhm.
And so it frankly did salvage the relationship, and we went on to do great things together for a long, long time. But uh, but the message was clear that there's critical importance to your point of continuing to build the trust and having a trusting enough relationship where you can always give compassionate feedback in both directions.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll tell you, many mentees actually feel relieved after getting clear, respectful feedback. Now they have something to anchor around, something to be aware of and work on improving. And so, if you're a mentor feeling some discomfort at giving feedback to a mentee, just know that the mentee often gloms onto that as something to anchor around and something to improve so that they can achieve the goals that they want to achieve in the workplace.
Well, Lord knows I was very happy to have seriously was very happy to have received that feedback from the team so that
Yeah,
I could build some skills a little bit better in my delivery.
yeah. And so when you're concerned about giving tough feedback and you have given tough feedback, just think, did anyone die from that feedback? Bill, did you die in getting that feedback?
I would like to think I got a little bit better from getting that feedback.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
we don't have a team here to ask the question, but I'd like to think I got better at being more compassionate, not just in what I thought I was saying, but actually what was heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, when you do that, this keeps the feedback from feeling personal or judgmental. If you can get yourself into a mind space that says people are having this conversation to make things better for both sides, and the feedback is not to hurt anybody. When we're talking with folks, for instance, if you're giving some advice to somebody, maybe a better way than saying, you're not communicating clearly, which is sort of an attack on their way of doing it. Try something like, well, for this role, clarity is going to be essential so the team can move faster. Let's look at how we can improve on that. So now you're aligning yourself with the work and not criticizing the individual.
Hmm. We're getting into some more actionable information here for mentors, making sure that they anchor the feedback in shared goals, and then also just use a simple repeatable structure if the opportunity affords itself where you observe the mentor's behavior regularly. Then there's a reliable framework to provide your mentee with feedback. So structure helps reduce the emotional stress and prevents over softening the feedback, being too soft and fuzzy about it. Clear is kind, right? And so think about where you observed the behavior. What was the situation where it happened? What was the behavior you observed specifically? And only use facts, right? Then talk to the mentee about the impact that that behavior had and why it matters. And then what good looks like next time. So when you observed it, what you observed, why it matters, and what you'd recommend good looks like next time. So as an example, you can say to your mentee, in yesterday's client meeting, the timeline wasn't clearly explained, which led to confusion and follow-up emails. So going forward, how about outlining milestones at the start of the meeting? That kind of feedback gives objective and actionable for the mentee. And this is for the mentor, actionable feedback on how to structure appropriate feedback when you observe the behavior specifically with your mentee. If your feedback is not actionable, it's actually not helpful. What
Right.
else would you recommend, Bill?
So when we talked about it a little bit already with my delivery in the wrong way, you want to be warm in what you're delivering, but certainly not apologetic for what you're saying. People pleasers have a tendency to dilute the feedback with apologies or excessive reassurance, and that kind of confuses the message. So I'm so sorry to bring this up, or this is probably just me, or you're doing great, but that's not really helpful. You're almost being apologizing for providing feedback as opposed to just start off with saying, I'm going to be calm and respectful and very direct in the conversation. And so, for example, in a very, very recent conversation with a mentee that I have these days, uh, we were really gelling and having lots of good, back and forth. And he said some stuff that I just wasn't on board with at all. And so I certainly didn't get upset. I just said, well, how about if I offer a contra opinion about that and maybe another way you could handle that in the future? And the good news is, that's built already on the fact that he knows that I'm trying to help him. There was nothing negative about it. I just didn't agree with the approach he had just offered up. And so nice and steady tone and just confidence and caring, the kindness in the whole conversation comes from clarity, not from cushioning people from it. So you know, a, a couple of suggestions on things I wouldn't say to how you might replace those things. Starting off with, I might be wrong, but how about you say something like, what I'm seeing is, we're not making a judgment whether I'm wrong or you're wrong. What I'm seeing is this, or this is just a small thing. Well, okay, it doesn't matter if it's big or small. This matters because is a much better way to deliver that. And also, I think a very common setup for people pleasers is to start with overpraising something before you give the feedback. You can briefly acknowledge what the positive side is, but then be very clear about what you'd like them to improve. And sort of as you're wrapping up your feedback, you know, instead of saying, does that feel fair? Fair doesn't really matter. I was told by one of my mentors many years ago when I said something wasn't fair. He said, "Well, I'm glad I could be here for this very important life lesson, Bill. Life is not fair." Okay, so let's not start or end our conversations with, "Does that feel fair?" How about, "Does that make sense?" As a much better way to leave the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. Ideally, we have the opportunity to see our mentees regularly and give kind of like micro feedback, give frequent feedback to seeing our mentees in action. Sometimes that's not always available to us. But when it is, just remember that, bigger conversations can feel scarier when they're more rare. So provide quick in the moment feedback. This is, again, more unique in the mentor mentee relationship where more often you as a mentor don't see your mentee regularly. But if you do, if you're in the same group, if you're in the same organization and have a lot of common projects that you see your mentee in, for example, conduct short check-ins instead of these formal sit downs that we, have talked about in the past when it comes to mentor mentee engagements. So when you do that, you can focus equally on both positive and corrective feedback. And that helps to normalize feedback for your mentee and kind of lowers the emotional stakes so they don't feel bummed. It's more just like, oh, this is a regular occurrence. This is my mentor actually wanting to help me grow and giving me consistent feedback on a regular basis that I can take and do something with. And hopefully he or she is watching me develop as I continue to grow in the organization.
I'd add to that also, particularly as you're just getting started out in this, and if you're still sort of uncomfortable in the beginnings of that relationship, when you're going to get prepared for doing the feedback, I would recommend writing it down first. As one of
Mm.
my earliest mentors said to me, when you write it down, it gets much better and it gets much clearer in your own mind, and you get a chance to take a look at what you're going to say, and you can edit out the stuff that we just talked about that sort of gets in the way of just being clear and compassionate. And so as you look at it, you can say, is this actually clear enough for my mentee to act on? I mean, the whole point of this discussion is giving feedback and giving them something that they can do about it to improve their situation. If it's not actionable, it's really just not that helpful. And so the clarity in writing things down often can lead to much more confidence in your ability to deliver an actionable message.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. One thought that comes to mind too is this idea that a mentor really builds their identity as somebody who is a fair leader who helps people, the organization and the company grow. It if your self-image as a leader is I like it. I'm nice when everyone feels good or everyone loves me. And that really kind of feeds that people pleasing nature of you. Then it just reminds me to shift your identity. And, James Clear talks about this in his Atomic Habits book, where he talks about shifting your identity. If you're trying to quit smoking, for example, and somebody offers you a cigarette, instead of saying, no, I'm trying to quit, shift your identity to say, I'm not a smoker. It doesn't matter what you did last week. It doesn't matter what you did last month. It matters now. You have this identity of not being a smoker. Well, of the same mindset, when you're a leader, if you have the identity of being a fair leader who helps the people in my organization, my company grow, that requires feedback. That identity makes feedback feel aligned with who you are and not a betrayal of it. So the bottom line is the best way for a people pleasing mentor to give feedback is, again, be clear, be structured, be goal focused. Remember that it's in service of the person, and deliver that feedback early and often if you can. And make sure that you understand that honesty and respect builds stronger relationships than avoiding giving that feedback altogether. All right, Bill. So we've got some general guidelines. What would you say is a general script or a process you'd recommend in giving honest and respectful feedback that's aimed at helping a person grow?
Well, before we even get to the actual script, I'd start off with uh, let's make it a very comfortable environment. If you're the big boss or one of the big bosses, and you have a mentee come into the room, don't sit behind your desk. Get out from behind your desk and sit at a table with them, and not directly across the table like I'm here to interrogate you kind of approach. Uh, also we haven't talked about it much, but these days there's people who are remote employees as well that may be mentoring. If your mentee is remote, you need to make sure that this is a video call with the cameras turned on. This is not the time to send email or Slack or chat messages. They have to be in person or they have to be in video real time. In fact, as a extra benefit for today's discussion, anytime you're going to have a contentious conversation, it needs to be in person or on video. It's insanity, and typically it results in negative outcomes to send contentious conversations through email or chat or text. There's just way too much opportunity for those things to be misinterpreted. So I'm begging you, as I begged everybody in our organization when I was still the big boss, please stop having contentious conversations. And it fits for the mentoring thing. It's not contentious, but it might be uncomfortable, as we were talking about earlier. Stop having those kinds of conversations in anything but in person or video with the cameras turned on. Okay, so that's the basic setup for getting started. As we start to talk, I would open up with something like, "Look, I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about you and your career growth. I see some areas I'd recommend you work on as you continue to grow as a leader in this organization." And you want to give them actionable feedback. And as you're giving the feedback on as you using the structure you offered earlier, as you're going through it, it's okay to ask if you're being clear with your mentee. Does that make sense? Or even check with them and say, "So, what did you hear me just tell you?" And if it's uncomfortable and they're sitting there really thinking about it, as the mentor, I would suggest you get very, very comfortable with uncomfortable silence periods. Let it grow a little bit in whatever's going on in the mentee's mind, and give them a chance to think about what you've been talking about. Uh, Now, I realize this is going to come a lot easier when there's already a level of mutual trust and respect. So, building that trusting relationship from the start is critical for effective mentoring. And once you're doing that, you get to stop worrying about people pleasing. As I'm doing that kind of mentoring, I want to make sure that that person knows I'm on their side. I'm in their corner. So, from the start of the mentoring relationship, and I typically say this over and over again, my whole job in this relationship is to make you incredibly successful.
Though
So
you
say
never
that.
said that to me. You never said that to me.
Well, I considered the source, and I knew I didn't have to. How about that? Wow, that was harsh. So, okay, so for all you mentors who are trying to do better than I did with Angela, use those lines and then say it and really, really mean it.
Yeah, the bottom line is, as a mentor, your role is not to make people comfortable, it's to make them better. In order to do so, people must grow, and that means giving feedback. Where have you given your mentees feedback on their growth opportunities? If you haven't, mentors out there, when will you incorporate that into your conversations with your mentees? Anything to wrap up, Bill?
I think you wrapped us up just fine. So, for everybody out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email. We've included the email in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.